In 2014, I started 2 field trials in my garden, a rock dust trial and a biochar trial. I went all out in the first year. I tracked yields, conducted taste tests, and took Brix readings. And I shared all my results in videos. I wasn't able to dedicate time to the trials last year, but this year I did find the time to track yields. Today I'll share the yield results for the 3rd and final year of my rock dust and biochar field trials. In the spring of 2014, I set up new raised beds for the field trials and divided them into 3 4x4 foot sections. The section behind me is the control. The area to my right, which is separated from the control by a cedar fence board, is the rock dust bed, and the 4x4 area to my left is the biochar bed. Biochar is used to improve the nutrient and water holding capacity of soil and to provide housing for microbes. Rock dust is used as a trace mineral amendment. Both amendments are reported, among other things, to increase crop yields. All 3 beds were initially filled with the same exact soil mix. Then 16 pounds of a popular horticulture rock dust was added to the rock dust bed, and 8 pounds of charged biochar was added to the biochar bed. The biochar was charged for 4 weeks in 16 pounds of fresh worm castings. An equal amount of castings was added to both the control and rock dust beds. So the only difference in the setup of the 3 beds was the addition of charged biochar to the biochar bed and rock dust to the rock dust bed. Before discussing the yields, I thought I'd clarify what I'm looking for in the results. Because we grew a number of crops in very small beds, the sample size for each particular crop is very small. Too small to draw conclusions about the impact of rock dust or biochar on any specific crop. So what I'm looking for instead is whether these amendments had an impact on the total yield of all crops over the 2 years that I tracked yields. I'm also looking for patterns. For example, did one group have the highest or lowest yield in both years? With this in mind, let's take a look at the results. We grew a different group of crops in each year of the trials, but in any given year, we grew an equal number of the same crops in all 3 beds. This year, the control group had the highest yield of bush beans, celery, elephant garlic, and Swiss chard, and the highest total yield of 9,514 grams. The rock dust group had the lowest yield of bush beans, pole beans, carrots, elephant garlic, kale, and Swiss chard, and the lowest total yield of 6,294 grams, which is 33.8% lower than the control. Finally, the biochar group had the highest yield of pole beans, carrots, kale, and tomatoes, and the second highest total yield of 8,759 grams, which is 7.9% less than the control. Now let's add in the 2014 results to give us our total yields over 2 years and to see if there are any year-to-year patterns that we can identify. The biochar group yielded 352 grams or 12.4 ounces more than the control in 2014, but this is not a significant difference. The rock dust yield, however, is a different story and establishes a clear year-to-year pattern. Rock dust yielded 33.9% less than the control in 2014 and 33.8% less in 2016. When we total the results for both years, we see that the control group had the highest yield. However, the biochar yield is just 1.4% lower, which isn't significant. But the bottom line is that biochar did not deliver higher yields. And the rock dust total is 33.9% lower than the control. This combined with consistently lower yields over 2 years with a variety of crops doesn't support the claim that rock dust produces higher yields. So what do I conclude from these results? The field trial results combined with the soil test showing nutrient surpluses have convinced me that I don't need to amend our garden soil with biochar or rock dust. In particular, given the very poor performance of the rock dust group relative to the control, I'd be reluctant to use rock dust again in the garden. That said, this is citizen science, and I understand that my field trials are not the final word on these amendments. In fact, though I didn't see improvements using biochar, peer-reviewed research has shown biochar to be very effective in improving poor soil. I suspect that it's not having much of an impact in my garden because the soil already has the properties that biochar promotes, namely high nutrient and water holding capacity and rich microbial life. However, I remain skeptical about rock dust, both because of my experience with it and because there's no peer-reviewed science supporting its use. And it's important to remember, your soil is already full of rock dust in the form of clay, silt, and sand. And there's no reason to simply assume that your soil is deficient in trace minerals. In fact, if you amend your soil annually with compost, it's pretty unlikely there'll be a deficiency. If you are concerned about a possible trace mineral deficiency in your soil, I strongly recommend having your soil tested for trace minerals. These tests are fairly inexpensive here in the U.S. through your agriculture extension, and the test can save you a lot of money in the long run if you learn you don't need to buy trace mineral amendments. One final message I hope you take away from my field trials is to always be skeptical of product claims, especially claims that seem to be too good to be true. And when you evaluate products in your garden, make sure to always use a control. You don't have to go to all the trouble I went to. If you set up a side-by-side test of a product versus a control, you can often see if there's a significant difference just through informal observation. To learn more about the field trials, please see this link for more details on the setup, taste tests, Brix readings, and yields. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for more videos on how to grow a lot of food on a little land without spending much or working harder than you have to.
Put on a show today.